Baltimore. Charm City. Neighborhoods full of history, great people, and lots of potential. A city trying to clean up its act after years of decay. A place where children should be safe to play on clean streets. But the pockets of problems are growing. Grime and crime make for bad neighbors. And now, even the once pristine parts of our wonderful city are in the fight of their lives to stop a city plagued by crime, grime, corruption, and failing schools. From Fox 45 News, this is a Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall, the Save Our City Tour. Neighbors helping neighbors, council district by council district.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us tonight for our 11th Save Our City Fox 45 News Town Hall. We continue to hold these conversations in each and every Baltimore City Council district. Tonight, we're in District 10 at the Iglesia Cristiana Church, and this evening, like all of our other town halls, we have invited Mayor Brandon Scott to participate in the discussion, but he is not here. However, we have invited a panelist, and let's introduce them to you right now. First up on our panel, we have Thuru Vignarajah, former federal prosecutor and candidate for mayor. We have Baltimore City Council District 10 Councilwoman Felicia Porter. Thank you so much for participating. Former Baltimore City mayoral candidate Bob Wallace. He was born and raised in District 10. And we have lifetime District 10 resident and Baltimore City faith leader Reverend Kenneth Harvard. Panelists, thank you so much for participating in this discussion. I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions from our audience members. But first, let's start with some news of the day, because 7 days ago today, we had the federal indictment come out against the Baltimore City's top prosecutor, Marilyn Mosby, and I want to get all of your takes on it. First, let's start with the big question about whether or not all of you believe that she should either step down, take a leave of absence, or resign as this indictment plays out. Councilwoman Porter, let's start with you. Do you think that Marilyn Mosby should step down or resign?
I think she should really reflect on her conscience, and if she decides to step down, she should step down. I believe that the people of Baltimore have placed her here, and so the people of Baltimore have a say that she was elected, and the second time being elected as well. So that's a personal choice, and you know, I would rather kind of hopefully she'll search her conscience, and I'm sure she will.
Do you think she should step down? I mean, in 2019, we saw the city council sign a unanimous letter calling for Catherine Pugh to resign, and the indictment hadn't come out yet. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, you know, I similar answer. I think she's going to search her conscience, and you know, the people of Baltimore have placed her there for a second time, and so it's obvious that people still believe in her.
Thuru?
Look, I don't think this is a hard question. I think when your attention is supposed to be focused on the challenges in Baltimore City, and you can't give it the attention it deserves because you're under federal indictment, the right thing to do for your family, for your criminal defense, for the city, and for your office is to step down. And for the sake of consistency, we called on Catherine Pugh to step down even before she'd been indicted. I had called on Darrell D'Souza to step down once he had been indicted. Once you are under federal indictment, you are not in a position where you can do the kinds of things that need to be done to make sure that the office is run well. A leave of absence is perhaps an appropriate compromise because there is an election on the horizon. But if you're not going to at least take a leave of absence, what you're saying to the city is that you're more important than they are, that your priorities and your pride is more important than their public safety and public service. I think that's a problem, and I frankly would urge her to reflect, to pray, to talk to her family, but then to ultimately do the right thing, which is to step down for the sake of her family as well as for the sake of her office in the city.
Councilwoman Porter, you said that she should reflect on her own conscience. Do you think that she's able to continue doing her job to the best of her ability as this indictment plays out? And she says she's going to fight these charges in court. Do you think it's possible to do that and still be the top prosecutor in Baltimore? I do.
I do think it's possible. I think that, you know, oftentimes we as leaders need to self-reflect. And so if she agrees that she can, you know, do the job to the best of her ability, and she is not, you know, in anywhere flagrantly negative negligent to the office. I believe that she should continue to do her job to the best of her ability. I think that oftentimes we get into this place of calling for people to step down without having the person's day in court, as we should say. We all are accountable to the law, and we all should uphold the law, but also we all are innocent until proven guilty, and that has not transpired. Yet, as I know.
Look, and look, I have a lot of respect for Councilwoman Porter for being here in the first place, but I will say, how do you reconcile that with the fact that we called for Catherine Pugh to step down even before charges had been filed? Sure. I think the challenge is, of course, there's a presumption of innocence. Yes. She has a tremendous defense team. She has her day in court. She's going to have a chance to challenge the evidence. But at the same time, she has one of the most awesome responsibilities in the state of Maryland. She's the highest paid public official in the state of Maryland. And the notion that she's capable of doing what is necessary to be done, I just don't know how you reconcile that with the fact that we called for Darrell D'Souza to step down. We called for the mayor to step down when they hadn't even been indicted yet.
Yes, and so Mackenzie, may I respond to that?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So those particular charges were financial in nature, and understandably so, those were flagrant financial charges in nature as it relates to their particular job. And so we know that the federal indictment came out. We know that there is presumption of an allegation, but we also know that there's a lot of evidence that still needs to be uncovered as we go through this process. And so, again, she will search her own conscience, and as you positively said, she'll pray and reflect with her family. But ultimately, I think that we have to allow the process to play out.
See, that's where I come down on this. I mean, I'm just a lowly engineer. I'm not an attorney, but I'm old school, right? You're innocent until proven guilty. All right. And so, although I disagree with Ms. Mosby's approach to how she does that job, I do not wish her or her family any ill will or harm, and I hope that they can work their way through this. I think the point that has been made is a valid point. She needs to look at it and say, can she perform her job, her function, given all these issues surrounding her? And if she comes out that she can perform her job, then she should stay in her job because she's innocent until proven guilty.
Pastor Kenny, what do you think about that?
Well, first, I want to give all honor to my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ.
Amen.
For being able to be here today. I think that because of the loss of the trust of the people, I think that she should step down.
What makes you think that she's lost the trust from the people?
Just by talking to some of my parishioners, other people.
What are they telling you?
Just that you don't know, now you don't know her. You don't know what she's going to do, what her motives are now, because this cloud has come upon her. And they just, they don't feel comfortable with her.
Or maybe she could step away from the job, right?
Like
step
a leave
away.
of absence?
Sorry, yeah, like a leave of absence, right? To get through all this and see where it comes out. I just want us to be careful that we don't pass judgment until we see all the facts about what was happening here. And I think all of us would want that. If we were in that position, we would want that same kind of consideration.
You mentioned that the election is coming. We know that the primary is in June 28th. We talked a little bit about how the election and conversations about that. We've the station FOX45 has done an unscientific poll, and people are saying they would vote for you if the election was held today.
Look, I appreciate the enthusiasm with which people have approached me about this, but candidly, look, I think that's as much a reflection of frustration with the city, of frustration with the state's attorney and the police department and the mayor. There's a lot at things that are not going well right now.
Right.
We've had 21 murders. I just learned another murder happened, on my way here in the last 20 days. We've had 40 shootings to begin the year. And so I appreciate the encouragement. I don't think this is the right time to have that conversation, but I do think it's a problem that we are having the same conversation in the beginning of 2022 that we had in the beginning of 2021 and 2020 and 2019, hoping and praying that things might be better, but not talking about any conscious, concrete things that we can do to be different. I love the fact that we actually just agreed to disagree about whether or not Ms. Mosby should step down. I think people of good faith can have different opinions on that particular question.
Right.
But how refreshing is it to have clear answers from people on that particular question? I happen to think that it's very difficult when you're under federal indictment to do your job. It weighs on you. It weighs on your family. You need to spend hours and hours talking to your defense attorney. And by the way, I didn't take this position when she was under investigation, because under investigation is quite different. A grand jury has heard evidence from federal prosecutors. A federal agency has decided that charges are appropriate. The main Justice Department, not Donald Trump's Justice Department, but Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Merrick Garland's Justice Department has decided that charges are appropriate. Absolutely, there is a presumption of innocence in a courtroom with respect to whether or not you should go to prison, but whether or not you still have the ability to do the job as the highest elected law enforcement official, I don't think that has the same standard. And again, I think the appropriate thing is for her to step down. And it's partly because I wish the best for her. I wish the best for her family. We all needed her to succeed. Things have not gone well, and I think at some point we've just got to say enough is enough.
I think a key point that he made was that, okay, if what you're doing is not working, then and you keep doing it over and over again, that's insanity, right? So as if the rule said, it's not working. So therefore, we do have to change a couple of things in order to get this violence under control.
When it comes to the policies, I want to ask Councilwoman Porter about some of the policies that we're seeing implemented across the city, specifically Ms. Mosby's prosecution policies. We saw her announce the permanent not prosecution for what crimes that she deems low level. That happened last year. Do you think that that was the right approach for the city, given the information and the violent crime that Baltimore continues to see?
Yeah, so, and then let me just give you a little bit of background. So I'm a public health practitioner by training, so I understand the approach that Madam State's Attorney, just want to correct you all, it's Madam State's Attorney, that she was doing with her approach to non-prosecution of low-level crimes. The problem is that our city infrastructure was not caught up in a way to take those into play. So, for an example, Mall Park, we have some of the highest rates of prostitution in Mall Park alone in the city. Highest rates of human trafficking, prostitution. We, as a city council, my office can only do so much. We have partnerships with St. Agnes. We have partnerships with nonprofits in the area. So when persons experiencing those issues come back out on the street, we need to make sure that we have the resources and the programs and the pilots in play once they come back out, not 5 to 10 to 15 years from now.
So do you think that implementing those policies, when you say the city's infrastructure wasn't up to date, was that a mistake on her part to roll it out as quickly or as soon as she did?
I'm not going to say it was a mistake. I think that, given the time that we are in, I think that there could have been more consideration. And I know that Madam State's Attorney, she has consulted the public health practitioners at Johns Hopkins University and also Morgan State University in order to balance those ideas. And so her office felt that it was the time. I think that, Theru, you make a great point that, when we have differing ideas, this is an opportunity for sharpening of the minds. And so we have our answer right there. We just have to agree to disagree. However, we cannot negate what is happening in our city right now. And so whatever happens, my office and the city council, and I know my colleagues, we are doing the work to make sure that we have that proper infrastructure in play.
Are you concerned about the fact that the state's attorney's office is no longer prosecuting prostitution? Do you worry about that impact on human trafficking in the city?
I worry about that. I worry about the impact of human trafficking just across the board. I think that when we talk about human trafficking, the non-traditional approach to human trafficking is, people that are working in our restaurants, undercover, that are getting paid under the table. That is the result of human trafficking. When we're seeing non-traditional methods of human trafficking related to simply going to hotel to hotel to hotel, as we've experienced in District 10, that is the result of human trafficking. That is really what human trafficking is. So when we're talking about non-prosecution, we don't want to re-victimize the victim. We want to really hone in on the perpetrator who's actually really facilitating these measures and these large-scale operations of human trafficking in Baltimore City and all across the Eastern Seaboard.
Can you focus on those people who are perpetrating that without intervening earlier? Some state's attorneys that we've talked to in other jurisdictions have said intervening perhaps on the streets and getting people arrested could help them.
Yeah.
Do you think that would be the case?
That could be one option, but understandably so. When we look at the perpetrators, I am more than likely, based on my research background, they more than likely were victims themselves that turned into perpetrators. And so it all comes back to the social services and the human aspect and the human psyche of these perpetrators as they turn into, as the victims, as they turn into perpetrators. We want to blight that pathway so that we can direct them into services. When we talk about prosecution, again, our rehabilitation system in Peru, I'm not sure if you agree with this or not, our rehabilitation system is not set up to truly rehabilitate people. It's not there. It's not there. And so if we're really going to have a conversation about, the effects of human trafficking, we really need to really have a clear understanding of our U.S. justice system, our state justice system, our state implications, our state involvement into the justice system and how we flow down into the city of Baltimore.
Look, I think Councilwoman Porter is focused on exactly the right thing, which is, do we have the infrastructure in place to do something as significant as announcing overnight that we are no longer prosecuting whole categories of crimes? There are other cities that have adopted and pursued approaches like this. What they have done is had public discussion.
Yes.
The city council and the mayor and the state's attorney's office and the police department and the other related agencies spent 5 years working on putting in place the protocols and procedures to make sure that happens. One example for that is if you have somebody who's being arrested or potentially arrested for prostitution in Morrell Park,
yes,
the opportunity is to connect them with the services that they need.
Yes.
But if you're not doing anything with them, if you're saying we neither have the services nor do we have an opportunity for you to engage the services, you are condemning them to the cycle that they're in.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And many of those arrests, I was a federal prosecutor, many of those arrests of low-level offenses is how you not only broke the cycle and got them to the rehabilitation services that they need, the addiction services that they need, but you also were able to build bigger cases against the traffickers,
yes,
against the drug kingpins. If you've taken away that weapon from the current arsenal without contemplating an alternative, I think the councilwoman being a little bit too polite, that was a mistake. The way in which it was done was a mistake. It may have been done because it was great political theater. It may have been done because it was the week after a federal investigation had been announced, but it was not done in a way that was responsible with respect to the people you are trying to help. If you're trying to help the victims of addiction and you're trying to help the victims of trafficking, you don't just announce a policy and then leave them on the streets with no help, with no resources, with no hope.
And I will tell you that, Madam State's Attorney, even though, I totally understand, your position. However, I just want to highlight that, again, this public discussion actually did happen. It was a series of public health practitioners that Madam State's Attorney conferred with, and also conferred with at Johns Hopkins University and Morgan State University. The thing that I think, is missing, and again, I just want to highlight again that the thing that is missing is that we are generationally behind in the infrastructure here in Baltimore City. So she had, to her credit, given I'm a process person, we've talked about this on a number of occasions. I'm a process person. So she has had those types of conversations. She has, enhanced her community liaison program. program. That is the sole responsibility of a community liaison program, to take that community discussion back to the state's attorney's office. And good, bad, or indifferent, the programs and the division is there in the state's attorney's office. Whether it's doing the best that it can be, that's a separate question. But I don't want to negate the fact that, one, it takes time to implement these types of programs, but also, number two, Baltimore is as you are formally aware, Baltimore is a very difficult animal, and something like that does not change overnight.
Councilwoman Porter, you said she had these conversations, she had these community discussions, and she still went forward with this process and these policies, knowing that the infrastructure wasn't there, though. That's what if she knew that the infrastructure wasn't there, why would she implement those policies the way she did? That's
a question you would have to ask her. I mean, just from an outside perspective looking in, given my background, I can see, the processes that need to be in place, particularly those in District 10. That's something that you would have to ask her.
And Mackenzie, one thing, the conversation that I think the Madam State's Attorney needed to have was with the people in this room. And if you can raise your hand if a single person participated in a conversation with the State's Attorney or one of her community liaisons about this policy, I'd love to see it. Was anybody part of that conversation?
Case in point, Mall Park. I remember a community meeting. There was a state's attorney's community liaison there. So here's the thing. I think we have to really understand that simply while you all are in the room are great, this is not reflective of the entire city of Baltimore, and we need to have a clear understanding about community engagement, because even at the council's office level, even during elections, we are missing key people that we only talk to during the election cycle. So this is not a truly representative sample of the citizens of Baltimore.
The good news is neither of us are running for state's attorney, so we can move on.
Even though I wasn't part of the conversation, I am living with the consequences of that choice, because I believe that it was a mistake. I believe that when crimes are committed at whatever level, you have to address them at that level, because if you do not, they will graduate into bigger issues of crime. My business is in Baltimore City. I moved my IT company from Columbia over 20 years ago, a tech company from Columbia, Maryland, to downtown Baltimore. I can tell you that every morning I have the homeless people on my back porch and my front porch. I've had employees who have been carjacked in broad daylight. I have customers who are afraid to come to the city. So if you don't hit these issues when they are small issues, they will grow into big issues. And that's why I think, as a citizen, I think that was a mistake to not address those issues.
Well, let's hear from some of the people who are here tonight. Part of these town halls, obviously, is to get some questions that you have answered. So let's go to Riel Creighton, who is in the audience talking to people. Riel, who do you have with us, and what is their question?
Mackenzie, a familiar face most certainly to you. This is Roya Hanna. Speaking of running for City State's Attorney, and we should note that she has announced her candidacy for Baltimore City State's Attorney, but she had a question on topic related to the impact of the charges on the city.
And the question is, how do you think that the indictment and other public corruption scandals impact the willingness of businesses and families to move into the city and to help us rebuild?
I think I'll take that one from a practical standpoint.
Go ahead.
So when the news first broke, I got texts and emails from my contacts all over the country, and they were saying, Bob, here we go again with Baltimore, right? Here we go again. And so at a minimum, this situation is disruptive to our city. It's disruptive to bringing in new businesses. It's disruptive to bringing in new talent. And that's a problem for our city. So even though I do believe that you're innocent until proven guilty, the fact is there's been an impact already to our city. It's here we go again about Baltimore.
But I'd also like to, I totally understand that, but I'd also like to share some of the positives that are happening in the city. There are a lot of positives. Roya, hello. There are a lot of positives that are happening in this city.
Absolutely.
And so, while this is a continued stain on Baltimore, I want us to focus on the positives that are happening in the city. Mr. Wallace, with your particular company, you have grown exponentially over the past couple of years in the city of Baltimore through.
By God's grace.
Yes, by God's grace, sir. Through you're being a executive director of a nonprofit, a tech company, an emerging tech company. This is an opportunity for us to change the narrative about what Baltimore is supposed to be.
Look, I love sharing positive stories about Baltimore. I'm full of positive stories about Baltimore, but you can't sugarcoat our reality. The best barometer of whether or not a city is doing well or not doing well is whether people are leaving or coming. And we are the only city in America that has been losing population and is smaller in 2021, 2022 now than we were in 1922.
But let's break down that data point.
We are talking, just to be very clear, we're not talking about the white flight of the 50s and 60s and 70s that happen in every city. We're talking about, as other cities are experiencing a renaissance and growing over the last 20 or 30 years, Baltimore has lost the lifeblood of its black community. Between 2000 and 2010, 100,000 African Americans arrived in Baltimore County. That's terrific for Baltimore County, but those are middle and upper middle class black families that called Baltimore home for generations that are leaving, and they're leaving because of crime, they're leaving because the schools are not good enough for their kids, and they're leaving because taxes are too high, and that's driving out businesses. So I love telling the stories about the fact that the James Webb Telescope was just launched from this city. We're going to see farther than we've ever seen before because of scientists that are working up in Hamden. But you can't pretend like that story is going to get a resident or a business to come to Baltimore when they just heard that we had 21 homicides in 20 days in Baltimore. And by the way, we haven't talked about that once in the last 3 weeks. We haven't talked about the mass murder, the 3 killings 2 nights ago, or the 16-year-old that was shot and killed at Penn North earlier today. We haven't talked about any of those things because we're talking about the state's attorney's race. That's what we're talking about.
Well, I want to bring up crime because obviously that is an issue that Baltimore is no stranger to. You just mentioned some of the crime statistics. 20 days into the year, 21 people have been shot and killed. I want to talk about Safe Streets because that's a program that is in the news recently. The Safe Streets program just lost its 3rd member since the start of 2021 who was shot and killed just yesterday. Reverend Harvard, I want to talk to you because you hear from people in this community. You're hearing from people who live here. When it comes to crime, is that a concern for most people that you talk to on a daily basis?
It definitely is. It's a big issue. People are afraid to come out of their homes. They afraid to say anything to anybody about anything. There's just a great fear in them about being in the city, and they don't have anybody to turn to. Our leaders are supposed to make us safe and make us feel safe.
We heard the same narrative when the late Officer Holly was shot and she later died. We talked to some community members in Curtis Bay who said they were afraid to come out of their house. They live across the street from that park and their kids aren't even allowed to go and play at that park. They can't be kids. They can't have that childhood. You talk about leaders. We have a leader on the panel, but I want to get to Bob Wallace first. When it comes to Safe Streets, are programs like that, do you think that they are working given the level of violence that we continue to see?
I believe that the programs like Safe Streets and others are important and necessary, but they have to be married with the ability for the community to patrol the community and to have the kind of response to violence that we see. I have employees who, as Pastor Harvard said, they say, Bob, when I leave the office, I go to the supermarket, buy my meal, and then I'm in the house, and I don't come out anymore that evening because I'm afraid. How can a city grow like that? How can we attract talent if that is the reality that we face? And I guess I'm kind of old school. I believe that there's a certain element in our community who has decided to take a gun and hurt people. And those people, we need to get them off the street now and lock them up. Now, I'm not saying that we criminalize the poor. I'm not saying that we criminalize the entire race of people. But I am saying there's an element in our community who has made the decision. They've crossed the line, right? And those people we need to get to and get them off the streets, whatever it takes.
Councilwoman Porter, you hear stories like this. You hear from families who are afraid to come out of their home. You are an elected leader representing this district, sent to City Hall to represent them. What are you doing to make your community safer?
So I'm actually taking it a step further besides criminal walks. I think that oftentimes we get into this place of doing things that simply not address the issue.
Amen.
When we are talking about different resources, when we're talking about funding mechanisms, when we're talking about police enforcement in District 10, we can say that we've done that on the last 3 occasions, particularly with Officer Holly alone. Yeah. I was talking with Commissioner Harrison and Director Witzberger every single day. We flooded that neighborhood in order to really, one, find out what the issue was, number two, make sure that, the community felt safe, and number three, ensure that we had the proper police presence in that particular community. Now, the question is whether that's sustainable given the large vacancies that we have in the Baltimore City Police Department. So I want, we really have to focus on the systemic issues that we are plaguing. Like, crime is not something that is episodic. It is a systemic issue. It is a systemic issue, and it goes back to my premise about the infrastructure. If we do not change our infrastructure here in Baltimore City as it relates to our criminal justice system, as it relates to our mental health, as it relates to our community mediation and healthcare and mental health system, we are not going to change the root causes of the issue. Everyone wants to talk about addressing the root causes, but when you start having the conversation about root causes, start looking and allocating funds to where those root causes need to be. Where are you?
And let's be very clear, because fighting crime, like fixing a city, it's a marathon and a sprint.
Right.
There are some things that you need to do that you will not see the flowers of your work for years to come.
Yes.
When you talk about taking lead out of the pipes that are underneath these schools, when you talk about making sure that heat and air conditioning units are in the schools that Thurgood Marshall graduated from, those things are not going to tomorrow make the crime rate go down, but you got to do it anyway, because that kid who right now is freezing at Frederick Douglass and had school closed last week and again this week because it's too cold to go inside isn't going to get the education he needs to break the cycle that he is currently trapped in.
Yes.
So we got to make that air conditioning investment, that heating investment today, knowing that it's not going to have any impact on the murder number for 2022. But you at the same time also need to recruit hundreds more police officers. Last year, our net loss of officers was 125 officers.
Yep.
Our police commissioner's been talking about how we need to be recruiting more police. I think that's a terrific goal. The mayor, I think, is committed to that goal. But the proof is in the pudding. And if we recruited 125 less officers than left the office, and we still need to send police officers into communities that are ravaged by crime, that want more police presence, we still need more detectives to work on shootings and homicides. We just don't have them. And that's not about the heat or the air conditioning or the lead paint or the public health. That's about getting cops on the street right now to make sure that the murder that is preordained to happen tomorrow, we got to stop that one too, because that life, the guy who's going to get killed later this week, his life matters too.
Yes.
But it's more than that.
It is more than that. Because it's a staffing
because
issue,
these officers, that's true.
Yes.
These officers, they have to get out their cars and they have to engage with the community and walk the streets the way they did when we were kids in Cherry Hill, right? For whatever reason, the officers are not engaging. They're not walking the streets. Maybe it's the Freddie Gray response. I don't know what it is. But it's not just a matter of getting more police on the streets. They have to engage more with the community.
So I like to, yes, sir,
really quickly.
Real quickly.
Those two problems are related. One of the reasons why cops can't get out of the car is because they're going from one 911 call to one 311 call. They literally don't have enough people to do it. They set up an algorithm for staffing years ago for how many cops you needed to make sure that there was an optimized response time and also enough time that they could get out of their cars and spend 25% of the time out of their cars. That was the goal. That fell apart because they didn't have enough officers and they needed to get back in their car and race off to the next stop. So those problems are connected.
So I want to really circumvent this conversation. Let's talk about solutions. So, Mr. Wallace, you understand from a staffing perspective, if we don't have the highest, highest salaries, not highest, but attractive salaries here in Baltimore, when we don't have the technology that we need for officers to do their job here in Baltimore, when we don't have the proper things and the proper mechanisms in order for police officers to truly to do their job, then what are we talking about?
Totally agree with you.
You understand what I'm saying? And
do.
these are things that we can implement now. I'm totally tracking with you, Mr. Well, can I call you through?
Of course.
Okay.
Everybody here calls me through.
Totally tracking with you. We need short-term intermediate and long-term solutions. However, I think we have to be honest about the daily lives of these officers day in and day out. And, you know, just to shout out some officers, community liaisons in the Southern District, they are doing a damn good job.
Oh, they do.
They are doing a damn good job. And so I don't want to negate the, you know, simply because we don't have enough officers on the street, that we don't have people in the department that are not doing the community liaison and the community engagement work that you're talking about.
So all I
When it
was
comes to
suggesting
recruiting,
is
though-
that there's a presence that needs to be felt by the police. That's what I'm talking about.
Okay,
They need
sir.
to be, their presence needs to be felt by the community.
When it comes to recruiting, I know that is obviously a big deal. We're hearing a lot about it when it comes to the consent decree monitoring team as well. But when you drive around the city, you see billboards for other jurisdictions,
Yes.
police departments in the city.
That is true.
So how do you make Baltimore a more attractive place to work for police officers when we do have the level of homicides and violent crime that we're seeing? We're seeing officers getting shot and killed on the job.
Yes.
It doesn't seem like City Council, what can you do to make Baltimore City a more attractive place for officers if that is going to be one of the root solutions to solving this problem?
So, Mackenzie, that's kind of a loaded question, and you know. So, in order for the council, understanding the jurisdiction of the city council, so understanding that, you know, not only can we make the city attractive, understanding that salaries are not under our control. So, salary, technologies, different things of that nature, we are able to cultivate that at the city council level. But ultimately, when we talk about funding allocations, we're talking about a larger conversation here, because not only are salaries attractive, we need to make our housing market here attractive. We need to make our economic climate here attractive. We need to make our education, you know, system here attractive. These, again, when we're talking about these are not one-off issues of simply a person coming into Baltimore. They are coming into a neighborhood that needs to be sustained, a neighborhood that needs to be revitalized. The officers that you're talking about, when they go up to Pennsylvania, when they go into different jurisdictions, they are looking for places to raise their family. They're looking for places to raise their family.
I love concrete solutions. No one loves concrete solutions more than me. So let me give an example. Just a couple months ago, Governor Hogan announced that he was committing $150 million to recruit and train more and better police, to train them in de-escalation strategies, to make sure that they had body cameras, to make sure that they had increases in their salaries, to recruit more officers. And in response to that, I know a number of us were very enthusiastic, despite the fact that he's a Republican and I'm a Democrat. We said, thank goodness the governor is identifying and doing something concrete about this problem. In response to that, our city officials, the mayor, the council president, the state's attorney, were either offended by the governor's suggestion or silent. And if, frankly, it was Governor Rashawn Baker or Governor Peter Francho that in a couple months had proposed that exact same thing, $150 million for de-escalation strategies, body cameras, and better training for cops, every one of our city leaders would have lined up for the photo op. But because it was a Republican governor, they said, that is terrible. They were silent. That's not okay. We have to acknowledge that good ideas come from lots of different places, and whether there's an R or a D next to your name is less important than the merit of the idea.
Let me ask you this, though, because when you talk about the narrative around police, we're seeing some of the difference in opinions just on the city council. We've seen some comments from your colleagues, specifically Councilman Ryan Dorsey, who has publicly said that the Baltimore Police Department should be abolished.
Yes.
How do you agree with that, and how do you work with that, knowing that you also want to attract and recruit more officers?
Yeah.
Is that a productive narrative to be putting out by elected leaders?
Well, you know, Councilman Dorsey we are independently elected, and of course, I do not agree with him. I think that police officers have their role, but I also think that educators have their role as well. You know, you cannot have a system that, again, continuously enforces. We also have to do the preventative strategies as well. When we're talking about whether I agree with him or not and how we maintain a conversation, that's what sharpening of the minds is. You know, that's what good governance is. You know, again, going back to the previous example, you had four opinions on this stage. We can agree to disagree and still make the city better. You know, people want efficient government, whether you're in Baltimore City, Baltimore County, whether you're in the Eastern Shore, making sure that your government works right and making sure that it's efficient for the taxpayers that are in that jurisdiction. Whatever you feel, you got to check that at the door. And I will say that, you know, my colleagues have done a good job of that. You know, they've done a good job of that given the incredible restraints that we are in.
But wouldn't you say, I'm sorry, go ahead, Pastor. Go ahead.
I just want to share a thought. I pastor a church in Cherry Hill, and I take my job very seriously. And through this pandemic and through things that have been going on in the city, my parishioners, they come to church because I make them feel safe.
Yes.
I take care of them. I'm at the door when they come in. I'm at the door while the service is going on to make them feel safe. They wear masks. They do their part to stay safe and social distancing and everything like that. I make sure that that happens. So they continue to come. And they've been coming to church all through the pandemic without an issue, without a problem, because I care, because I make the effort. And I say that because all leaders should do the same thing.
And that's essentially,
And that's what
I mean,
you're saying,
you're
right?
exactly right. I mean, one of the things when I came into this office, in one of the largest councilmatic districts in Baltimore City, in some of the most violent communities, Brooklyn and Curtis Bay, my office works round the clock. My staff can attest. I will send you an email at 4 a.m. to get going. We are there. And so we have made a concerted effort not only to rebuild that public trust here in District 10, but also to rebuild that public trust within communities as well. And that's that's what I want us to focus on. When we talk about making people safe, I want us to really understand what that means. It's rebuilding the public trust. It's making sure that people have the proper resources that they can support their family and have a positive quality of life.
I want to talk about education, but first let's go back to Rielle Creighton because she is joined with another member of our audience. Rielle, tell us more.
Christina Flowers, she is a longtime homeless advocate in Baltimore City, has worked tirelessly to try to get homes for some of the city's most vulnerable population. But your concern really had to do with some of the social ills that you encounter every day.
Yes. And good evening, everyone.
Hello.
Good evening.
I'm really excited to be able to speak on our social ills in all the districts, all the communities that are in question. And I'm really grateful. Thank you, Councilwoman, for probably being one of the second entities out of City Hall. I think Yitzi was the first one that decided to join. I'm very conscious of that. But I think of Daru, I think of Brother Wallace. Everyone have leadership in them. How do you guys feel, and even the leadership, the shepherd, the pastor over the sheep, how do you feel that our social ills are really being affected in all districts? When it not only comes to homeless individuals, but we're talking about our substance abusers, our addicts, those social ills and that infrastructure that Councilwoman spoke of earlier that we're not sustaining. And when you're talking sustaining funding sources, how we're working together in the community with different organizations, grassroots organizations, people having solutions coming to the table. This room could be appalling and it could be exciting at the same time.
Amen.
Because we have so many individuals that are interested in these topics and issues, but it becomes a problem when we have to sit down and really discuss it. The hard conversation. We listened to our mayor this morning on WRB 1010, and he spoke of everything except homelessness, our temperatures, our weathers, our homeless individuals in these encampments. Which I speak to you so frequently. Like I said, Councilwoman, it could be 4 o'clock in the morning. I will hit your inbox because you were there even before any of this, working with one of the closest encampments to here, where I met Officer Holly at as well, being attentive to that population. We have to get back to the basics, and Pastor, maybe you can understand where some of us got to get in our own lane of humanity. And we need the voices of others and leaders to execute that plan when we're talking getting our homeless off the streets.
So is the question about how much is being done? What is being done?
What is being done to those social ills to increase
Yes.
behavioral,
Yep.
crisis intervention.
So the short answer is not nearly enough. And I want to start by saying that Christina Flowers is the leader. I don't know that there's another person who's more synonymous with fighting for the people that are afflicted with homelessness across this city for the last 20 years. And I think you know this issue as well as anyone. Let me give a very concrete example. Everybody talks about the fact that we had, 300 plus murders again for the 7th straight year last year. How many people talk about the fact that we had 1,000 overdose deaths last year? How many people talk about the fact that we announced through political theater a program called LEAD, Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion, that would take victims of addiction and get them to the substance abuse centers that they need? We launched a pilot 5, 6, 7 years ago, and it is the same size as it was back then as it is today. It used to have 60 spots. 60 spots. The estimate is that there are 16,000 victims of addiction in this city, and that program has not grown from the day that the press conference ended. That's a problem. Yeah. And we can't just talk about it. You actually have to do something about it. And it's not enough, with all due respect for all the work that Christina Flowers does. She can't do it alone. Yes. And we have to be partners with her. So the short answer is not nearly enough.
And I agree. I mean, that's where, Christina, that's where, I have kind of stayed, stood in the gap, because there's not nearly enough being done for the homeless population and those experiencing homelessness. I want to, really kind of, again, elevate the conversation. We have a we have a homeless population, but we also have people, that are experiencing homelessness in the non-traditional fashion, couch surfing. We have our youth and young adults, our LGBTQ population that is experiencing these types of social ills. So again, agreeing that we're not doing enough, but understandably so. There are ways, particularly from the council's office, that we can stand in the stead. And I would challenge, if you do have any type of interactions or issues with my colleagues, I'm more than willing to stand in that stead as well. I know they are working round the clock on this issue. Homelessness does just not appear in District 10. It appears all across the city. And we as a collective, as we move forward in our tenure in public office, we can have these hard types of conversations. We have had these hard types of conversations. Unfortunately, when we're talking about things that need to be happening tomorrow, there's going to have to be some drastic shifts that need to happen, and funding is just one of the sources. Political will is another. We need to ensure that we are flowing the right money to the correct organizations that are actually doing the work.
Is there not political will?
Here's the issue, Ms. Flowers. Here's the issue. The issue is these items are all connected. The problem we have in Baltimore City is that if we do not attract enough businesses and young families and energy and innovation, then we lose the opportunity for tax revenue, right, that pays for these kinds of services. And what we're finding in the city is that we're having to go to Annapolis and other places to give us money to meet the needs of our people. If we don't deal with an environment that doesn't attract new young families, doesn't attract entrepreneurs, doesn't attract businesses, then we lose the opportunity to generate the revenue, the tax revenue, to meet the needs of these kinds of services. That's the bigger issue that we have in the city.
And then we must,
empowerment abilities to equip entities and
Yes,
other
ma'am.
individuals to do that work.
Yes, ma'am.
The work can be done, and
Agreed.
it can get done, and we don't have to live with homeless people on the streets.
Agreed.
Because their trauma trickles out
Amen.
into communities,
Yes, ma'am.
into neighborhoods, and you find them on the back of experiencing pulling a trigger, being involved in a homicide as well.
Yes, ma'am.
Because they're used and vulnerable by all population.
Right.
And
So
that's-
yes, we can do the work.
That's why we must allow the wisdom that comes from God to bring us together to solve these problems, because we can't solve them on our own. God has the answer.
And it starts.
He has the power to
Mr. Wallace, I want to
bring us
interrupt
together.
because I want to talk about education, because that is obviously a big conversation. We know that it's linked to the crime problems. We know that it's linked to a lot of the issues and the conversations that we're talking about. Obviously, at Fox 45, Project Baltimore has been investigating Baltimore City Public Schools for years. The investigations have shown some serious concerns and deficiencies within some of the buildings and the districts, most notably at Augusta Fells. Obviously, that was a big conversation last year. Councilwoman Porter, Does the school system concern you at all? And do you think that the CEO, Dr. Sonia Santelises, should be held accountable for what we now know is confirmed happening with ghost students and grade changing?
Yeah, and I appreciate, Mackenzie, I just want to first say I appreciate, the due diligence that you all have done with Project Baltimore. I think that, when we're talking about the education system in Baltimore City, we know that everyone cares. Everyone wants to have a common ground to make sure that our students not only are excelling, but they're excelling to the best of their abilities. And so when we're talking about Project Baltimore and some of the outcomes that came out from Project Baltimore, there have been things that the school board and Dr. Santelises have put into play as it relates to audits, as it relates to improvements in the ventilation system, as it relates to, different items that were founded in Project Baltimore. And so again, when we look at from an infrastructure issue, it's going to take time. And these challenging questions as it relates to ghost students, we have to figure out why they're ghosting. Not why they're ghosting, but why they're not going to school as it relates to chronic absenteeism. We have to really understand, the nature of the 22nd century student. We're not truly utilizing the opportunity that we can in the education system to really attract and keep these students in school and performing to the best of their ability. We have some students that are reading at such a substantial grade level below where they should be. These are opportunities that I know that the school board and Dr. Santelises have put into play.
But let's be real, though. Let's be real here. So in any organization, in any enterprise, if that organization and enterprise is not performing at the level it should, if I'm a coach of a football team and my team is not performing, what happens? The coach gets fired. I'm a CEO of my company. I am responsible for that company. Yes. If it doesn't perform, guess what? It's on me. And so I do think that she needs to be accountable for the performance of that system.
Councilwoman Porter, you're nodding. Do you agree? Should she be held accountable, and what does that look like?
I mean, I think as elected leaders, even though she's appointed, I believe we all should be held accountable.
How is she held accountable if she is appointed? Should she have her contract not renewed? Should she be fired? Should that conversation and that pressure be coming from you and other leaders in City Hall?
I think it needs to come from the mayor, and I think that the mayor is essentially having those types of conversations. Like, again, this issue is not new. This issue has been happening for decades.
Isn't that part of the problem, though?
That is a part of that. No, you're exactly right. That is a part of the problem. However, I don't want it to hang on one person that they will provide the magic bullet of solution. Yeah. And so again, we have, I totally agree that she needs to be held accountable. The school board needs to be held accountable. We as elected leaders need to be held accountable. But again, we cannot negate what they are doing and what processes they are putting in play to reconcile what you all have found in Project Baltimore.
Let me ask you this. If you think that the school board should be held accountable, do you think it would be easier for them to be held accountable if they were all elected?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that...
do you think, yes or no?
That's a good question. I think that, again, you can't, when we talk about an elected school board, of course, personally, I believe in an elected school board. I think that when we're talking about direct access from communities into how dollars of the education system should be flowing, I think that communities need to have a direct access and accountability for that. But I also know that I serve a constituency of many, many people that have many different opinions. And so for me to say that, yes, I believe as an elected leader, as a person representing District 10 on the stage, I want to go back and make sure that I check with my constituents first.
I think a hybrid approach is better. I think a hybrid approach.
What about you as a person?
What about me
as a resident of Baltimore City? Yes or no?
Yes.
I think a hybrid approach will work, right? Where you appoint certain members and you elect certain members. Yes. I think the hybrid approach is what will work best.
We know that funding, obviously you brought up funding, and we know that Baltimore City Public Schools gets a significant amount of funding. Starting this year, yes. And next year, Kerwin will be implemented from the state level. How will more money improve the system when the school system is already getting some of the highest amount of money per student in large school districts across the country? Councilwoman?
So again, let's break down that data point. Again, we're talking about getting some of the highest rates across, all 24 jurisdictions, but we have to look into what the quality of life for our students here in Baltimore City. They are much more and much greater than what, other youth and young adults are dealing with in the other 24 jurisdictions. So that $9,000 that may work in Howard County, given the best schools in I think in America, is not going to be the same. It's not going to transfer the same here in Baltimore City. And so we really have to understand that. And Kerwin, essentially the formula with Kerwin, normalizes that.
So let's just put this in context. It's not the highest just in the state. It's the third highest in the country. And that means two things. If you want to send more money to the school system, I think there could be some very good reasons for that. But I'd like to know exactly where that money is going.
Agreed.
If the state or the city wants to give me $50 million to overnight put heat and air conditioning units in every school that doesn't have them, absolutely sign me up. If the state wants to give $100 million to have a dedicated transit system so kids aren't riding the public transportation system for an hour and 45 minutes to get to school and an hour and 45 minutes back, I'm all ears. But if you're going to take the money that you have and spend it willy-nilly to have ghost students and all of these other things, passing kids when they're not ready, promoting kids and promoting teachers when they're not performing, that's a problem. And so before you go and ask for more money, even if it is for dedicated purposes, let's start by doing an audit, a top-to-bottom audit of every school. Why is that so difficult? Why is it so difficult to get a clear handle on where this money is going? Because there's different accountings. You can go and look at the budget of a specific school, but all of that extra money that's in North Avenue, all those extra employees, nobody has a clear sense. And with all due respect, I don't think Dr. Santalese is alone to blame, because we have a little too much patience in this city. We think because the problem took 50 years to get here that it's going to take 50 to solve. Nobody on the city council is going to be on the city council in 50 years. So if you say you got to wait 50 years, you have abdicated all responsibility. There was a mayor in New York who said, if a pigeon dies in the park, it's my responsibility. It was a message about saying everything that happens is my responsibility. The crime doesn't go down, blame me. The schools don't get better, blame me. The potholes don't get filled. The homeless don't have places to sleep. The addiction level is going up, blame me. That's not what being a politician is. That's what being a leader is, and that's what Baltimore, frankly, needs.
But how many of us know that? How many of us know? How many of us can know where the money's being spent right now today? How many of us are holding the board and the school system accountable and says, tell me, how are you're the third highest per pupil in the nation, how are you spending that money?
So
part of it's us too.
Yeah, and we're running out of time. I want to get one last question.
Can I just say one thing?
Quickly.
I'd like to say, how many of you all on the stage have been to a school board meeting within the past year?
Come on. Tell the truth.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
No,
I appreciate that. And so when we're talking about holding our school board accountable, when we're talking about holding our elected officials accountable, we as a people need to show up. We can't, as elected leaders, cannot do it alone. We can, suggest ideas, we can implement programs, but we cannot do it alone. And that's the sole reason why I'm here tonight.
Let me ask you this one thing. We're running out of time. I'm sorry. I want to ask this last question. We talk a lot about young men coming out of the school system and how they are impacted by the city. But what about women? As a woman, are you concerned about the school system failing Baltimore City's girls?
I am. I'm concerned. And I mean, as a member of the education subcommittee on the city council, I think that it's an opportunity for us to have that conversation about gender, but also non-traditional gender as well. Because even though I am biologically a woman, we understand that there are people that identify as women. So, there are violent crimes against them. There are violent crimes against black women. There are violent crimes against women in general. Again, when we're talking about violent crimes against women, we have to really circumvent that conversation to really understand why it's happening and who it's happening to and how we can provide solutions for it as well.
This hour went by extremely fast, and I want to thank all of you for participating, especially the councilwoman who is coming and joining this discussion and hearing from questions from the members of the audience. I want to thank all of the audience members as well for participating, asking those questions. We are going to continue to host these town halls in the rest of the Baltimore City Council districts throughout the year to listen to your concerns in hopes of finding some solutions for Baltimore City. But for now, thank you so much for joining us, and have a great night.